All right. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning,
Andrew. I have a problem. Dayna's here from the University of Alberta, and she's going to be presenting on the good, the bad, and the controversial. Restorative justice and what that kind of looks like as well. So make sure to take some notes and stuff too. You'll have a lot of good things to take back to institutions as well. And we're here. Thank you.
This is going to be like a pretty casual presentation. I use a lot of slang. I say like and a lot. That bothers you? Like, you still have time to find another presentation? But I just thought like I'd let you know. And I move a lot. I use my hands a lot. So like, just so you guys know. So yeah, restorative justice and what it means in residence. My name's Dayna. I'm from the University of Alberta, which is in Edmonton, which is like an hour and a half one way from here, I think north-ish. I'm not really sure where we are right now. I'm not from this in psych, and I'm a nutrition. Last year, I was a resident assistant and the Aboriginal programmer for residents in Lister, Mackenzie Hall. If you're like, if you know about the University of Alberta, that's like a first year residence. It was like a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. This is my team. And this year, I am a senior resident assistant, which is just kind of like a supervisor type position for RAs. In East Campus Village and Mackenzie Hall, which is like on the other side of campus from Lister. So a little bit of a journey. This is my team this year. Rip. Before we start, that I had like a few weeks ago. It's called full value contract. Basically what that means is it's like in this session. So like I like straight up copied this from like Christian's presentation. Be present, like be here with me, be honest, like don't hold back, but also be like respectful. Oh, that all came at once. Be open to learning from me, from people who make comments, from like others mentioned in the slideshow. And be accepting of the opinions and perspectives brought forward. You might not have, like, you might not agree with them, and that's okay, just like, and yeah, so there's a lot of memes, because I'm trying to be like hip with the youth. I just turned 20 in June, so yeah, here's like my first one. It's fun. Yeah. Okay, and yeah, quick turns, just because I know like not every institution is the same. I've learned a lot about that very recently since coming here. So what's an RA resident assistant? RA, SRA, RC, I know some people call them like area coordinators or like RLCs, all like kind of the same thing. RJ is restorative justice. I will probably say RJ more than I will say. And if you notice that I'm like not using student leader and I'm using like RA, SRA, give me like a little wave from the crowd. I'll like try to remember to like change what I'm saying. So, the big question, what is restorative justice? Okay, well Google, I'm going to read straight from this, says it's a system of criminal justice that focuses on the rehabilitation of offenders through reconciliation with victims and the community at large. I think this is a pretty good definition, but like let's break it down a little bit, because I mean, it is 11 o'clock in the morning. So what does this mean? So both the offender and the victim are present in the process. That's kind of unique. There's the use of a neutral mediator, which is often like the role that like a student leader plays. There's repairing of the harms. So it's like the harms to the victim, the harms in the community, whoever's been affected by it, looking for ways and solutions to resolve this. Rebuilding of the trust. So like learning how to like take what someone's done and like move forward from it instead of like letting it hold them back or like not allowing them to integrate back into the community because of it. Yeah, and there's a dog shaking an old man's hand. What do I have to point at my computer? That's holiday. Okay, at the U of A, that's where I'm from, that's where I learned about it. No one from the U of A. So what does it look like? So the role of the student leader at the U of A is basically to like facilitate and like guide students towards restorative justice. So we're not like there, you know, like cracking down on people, like making the rules. We're like there to like teach people how to like basically be like decent human beings and like how to like resolve conflict on their own, giving them the tools that they need in order to like progress in their futures. We use things like CRs, community resolutions. These ones are actually like my favorite example of like restorative justice a little bit, because what they are is like if you have like willing to listen to you, kind of, you write like a nice little email and you're like, hey, like, here's what we talked about, hope you have a great evening. And it's like a really good way to like community build and also show people that like, you know, it doesn't always mean like, you know, like something bad's gonna happen, you know? I like it a lot. We also have like IRs and I'm sure you're all like very like used to writing. Things that are more serious, like you might not have done something bad, but maybe it's a situation that like we think would benefit from like a restorative follow-up. We can do it through programming. Programming is a big one. Learning how to reintegrate people into the community using things like programming. So like someone who is like constantly like partying and not studying and like whatever, disturbing other students' study habits, like maybe we throw like a program where like that's program on the floor to show like they are committed to like for a better place. Getting it? Okay, and then like a method of conflict management, like learning how to talk to people and get them to like use. So I might have to like jump off the podium and see if it works. And also we don't have speakers, so. Yeah. I think it's not gonna. It's like.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, did it do it? Oh, okay. Christian, do you know how to play?
Oh, sorry.
I don't know. Okay, well, this week, that's why I've been pointing this here, like nothing. So also I need like 5 other people to help me get a YouTube video. In my words. What's up there? The one beside it is loaded and just didn't know. If you go to the open. Yeah, that one's good. Like that one. Okay, this is video.
Oh, I'm Jay, man. What's up? I'm Dayna Wallington. Hey, what you got there? Roommate. Hey, what's that? Look, college already. No way.
Okay, that's
no
good.
way.
Beautiful. The next video is like worth you standing there. That one is like restorative justice isn't always like someone did something wrong. Sometimes it's about like that is like big partiers, but like in a group like that, it might be beneficial to have like a restorative meeting, which we're going to like learn about, and how to like conduct those restorative meetings. Okay, so yeah, exactly. What is a restorative meeting? So there's like kind of a process to like restorative meetings. Basically, they are conversations that we have with residents that let like both parties give their chance to give their viewpoint. Then the mediator will come up with kind of like a plan of action, set up a meeting time, set up like how things will go. Then the victim or representative of the victim, depending in the case, usually the victim in residence is not usually anything like serious. And the offender will like meet together with the mediator, have like a good discussion. Both sides will get to like share their part and work together towards a solution. So the process is as such. You meet with the offender and victim separately. Then you create a plan of action for the restorative meeting as the mediator. This is like as an RA or as a student leader. Then you mediate between both parties during the restorative meeting. So like, you know, if Danny Ben's like, I want to go to bed at 10, and the two guys are like, dude, like that's not happening. Like we're going to bed at 4. Like, and they're just like not budging. You get to say like, well, like college is my place to like party and hang out, and they get to explain their side. Whereas like Daniel Bench might be like, hey, I'm like, want to go to med school. I need to go to bed at like 10 p.m. Letting them both give their sides. This is a funny meme I found on the internet. Yes, and then like help them find an agreement, a solution. So maybe like Daniel Benjamin's being unrealistic, saying like all 3 of them will go to bed at 10 o'clock. Earphones or like earplugs. Maybe he'll wear like a sleep cap so that when they come in at 4 in the morning, they aren't waking him up. Maybe the other 2 roommates decide like, hey, on like Mondays through Wednesdays, like we'll be in bed by like midnight or 1, but on the weekends we're going hard, you know? I mean, like meeting in the middle, finding some solution that will work for both of them. And then following up, that's like the job of the mediator to make sure both sides are holding up their end of the agreement. So like we don't want like, you know, Daniel Benjamin's wearing his earphones, he's wearing his sleep mask, and he's doing all he can to like accommodate their lifestyle. We don't want the other two roommates to be coming in and being like, turning on the lights, like hosting parties in the room and things like that. So making sure that both sides are like being equal. Maybe I'll stand on this side. Oh, that's low. Okay. Okay, so there are a couple of different models with restorative justice. So I wanted to list the benefits or the benefits that I see of either. In my eyes, there are like two like very strict methods, and then there's like a bunch of like crossover. And that's kind of like how a lot of residences are like set up, is like have a mixture of both, but not all of them. So there's restorative justice, and then there's like what I've called punitive consequences. I'm not really sure what other residences call it. That's just like the best descriptor I could think of. Okay, so restorative justice, what are some benefits? There's like not a lot of fines or fees for residents often. Usually it's more of like a conversational learning experience, less of like a, here's your like $200 fine, pay this next Monday or you're evicted, which, you know, you give an opportunity for each resident to give their side of a situation. That's kind of unique. It's not just like, this guy did it, we know he did it. You don't get to like, and sometimes in punitive, you don't get to see like why he did what he did. You just get to see what he did. The victim might find closure, and they control the pace sometimes of the restorative justice process. So, you know, if they're like, hey, I want to reconciliate with this person, but like, I need some time, like what they did was not okay. So like, I just need to process this and figure out where I am with it. Gives you a little bit of room to like, let them be the judge. Whereas like in a punitive system, it might not be so much. The victim might just be like, oh, that happened to you. Sorry to hear that, and moving on to the next thing. The offender gets to take responsibility and understand the harms of the situation, perhaps for the first time. You know, like being able to meet with the victim is a lot different of an experience for the offender than like just hearing like, you know, you hurt this person or this community. It's like very different to like hear their personal perspectives, and it can be really impactful sometimes for the offender, and give them an opportunity to learn. And the offender is assisted in restoring the trust of the community. Like I said, I've been through things like programming or like tips and tricks on how to get back into people's good books or like things like that. I really like that part of it. I don't think that people should be ostracized for making one mistake or like a series of similar mistakes. And it teaches accountability. That's something that I find like in our generation and like the generation coming up, accountability sometimes can be a really tricky subject. We're trying not to like baby people, but we also want them to like be able to like understand what they've done and take responsibility for it and learn from it. So punitive consequences, if there's like a better term you'd prefer me to use if you're like a strictly punitive institution, let me know. Okay, that came quick. So there are like lots of fines and fees for breaking house rules. So what that means is less burden on resident services. I know like housing takes like a pretty hard hit at the U of A sometimes, or resident services in general with like fees and fines, depending on like what the situation is. Belief that more severe consequences may influence people not to break rules in the future. This is kind of like the prison attitude. If we like condemn them, they'll learn better and they won't do it again, which is proven to be wrong. By giving power back to the student leaders, I mean more like, not that we want to govern out of fear, but it gives a little bit of like, hey, like if you're doing this and you're caught doing this, there is like a serious consequence. And it gives like leaders a little bit more of a chance to like, really like drive those house rules home versus like sometimes restorative justice, residents treat it as a joke, and it can be really hard for the RA to have like a meaningful connection with that resident and trying to like have them learn what's going on. If like they don't want to take responsibility. There's no gray area. It's either like you did it and this is what's happening, or you didn't and it's not happening. With restorative justice, it's a lot of it like, this is how I feel, this is my opinion, this is like how I saw things. Which like, I don't know, it depends on the situation, but it can be kind of hard to like deal with those situations, especially if like there's a weird gray area where we're like, who really is in the wrong here? Okay, and some people will argue that it models most real life situations. So things like you break a law and you go to jail. That's like something that like our country kind of runs on. You know, you do something wrong, you pay a fine, you do time, you know, there's this, you have to do that. Even with things like, oh, you have so many hours of community service, it's not usually something that's like talked about with the offender, it's something that's assigned to them, which like I like would agree, it does model real life, but I still, oh, and there's less time consuming. I meant to put that point before that so I could segue, but yeah, it's less time consuming. There's not like a restorative meeting that has to take place, there's not like a whole ton of time and energy that has to go into like making sure every side is represented. You can just be like, it's very like, this is what happens and it's done now. Sorry, I will learn. Okay, so like a good example of like the two in comparison would be smoking inside of a unit, which is like something, I don't know about your institutions, but our residents apparently struggle with. Both years that I've been working in resident services, people just like don't get that like smoking indoors is like not allowed. Okay, so restorative process, how this would work for our institution a little bit would be like, you explain the house rules to the person, you would have them identify the harms of smoking indoors. So you might say like, oh, like, how do you think this would affect someone with like, you know, asthma? Or like, do you think like people enjoy the smell of this, and having them come to the conclusion and say like, you know what, like I guess me smoking, like it damages the building. It like might make other people uncomfortable, you know. It's like just not like, it's a health hazard and it's a choice that I'm making that's affecting other people. Having them own up to that, they don't usually get that deep. Usually they go like, yeah, asthma, yeah, you're right. Document it depending on how the conversation goes. Sometimes it's a community resolution where we're like, hey man, you owned up to the harms, that's awesome. Sometimes it's an incident report where we're like, yeah, we gotta follow up with this guy, he like really didn't get it. And then the follow-up usually happens with someone like me, an SRA, or an RC, residence coordinator. Sometimes with the RA, not always. In the punitive process, from my understanding again, you explain the house rules, so like, hey man, you can't smoke in here. They say, or then you say like, you know, every time you get caught smoking in a unit, you pay a $250 fine. That $250 comes from like, we now have to bring in a cleaning crew, kind of like at a hotel. If you smoke in a hotel room that's not designated for smokers, you pay a $250 fee because they now have to take out the linens, they have to wash the walls, they have to wash the carpet, they have, you know, like they have to go through a process of like making that room now like smoke free and like suitable for other guests who do not smoke. So like potentially having some sort of like fee in there. They document the situation. Again, I'm not super familiar with it. I'm going to assume it would be like an incident report so that people could follow up with the punitive consequence. A bill from housing saying like, you made this decision, here's your consequence. So, are the results of using both of these? I really like this. I looked for a long time because I knew it existed, but it didn't come up right away because I couldn't remember her name. Okay, so restorative justice. What are like the effects of this? So like, we have a potential like emotional response. People might feel bad, they might feel guilty, they might learn from their experience a little bit, think twice before they do it next time. But there's no quote unquote real consequence. There's no like, you know, fine that comes along with it, or, you know, there's no like, hey, this is your first strike, 3 strikes and you're evicted. There's no like hard cut thing. It's just kind of like a, like, we need you to not smoke in here. The punitive, there are consequences. There's a fine, there's a fee, there's whatever your institution uses. But there's no like real identification of harms. There's no real accountability. It's kind of like, here you go, and like, not our problem anymore. You do the reflection. Which, like, in my opinion, is not like beneficial to the learning process. Sometimes restorative justice backfires. I know I'm talking negatively, I promise I've built it up a little bit, but sometimes it backfires, which I thought this is really good for this slide. Because she's trying to do a good thing, and it's hit her in the face. I don't know if you've seen this video. It's a girl from like The Amazing Race, I believe, like 8 years ago, where she had to shoot, like catapult this watermelon like across and hit a target. It was like her third watermelon, and it like came right back around. She like couldn't feel her face, she couldn't see. It was like really bad, and she still had to finish the competition or they'd be disqualified. It was horrible. So fines and fees. Residents don't really pay the fines or fees, so like that's not great for resident services. It doesn't really like teach a big lesson. There's no tangible consequence. It's kind of like spoken word, but there's no like real meat, you know? A lot of people would say restorative justice is like babying residents, or like, you know, like treating them like they're little kids, not giving them any like adult consequences. I would disagree with, but my parents think we baby them pretty hard. It's harder to reinforce. Again, restorative justice is all words, it's all emotions. So like, how do you like really like drive that home if all you're doing is just like having a conversation? And the offender needs to own up to their harms and help find solutions in order for it to be a restorative meeting. If they're like, I wasn't smoking in here, I wasn't doing that, and like they're not admitting to it, you cannot have a restorative conversation, because in order for restorative justice to work, the offender has to own up. If they're not going to own up, you can't have that restorative meeting, and then you have to like try and figure out some other way to go around it, especially if your residence has no like punitive consequences, or like has very few punitive consequences. But why we should use it anyway? Oh no. Fun fact, my roommate, her name's Jenna, she went as Napoleon Dynamite last year for Halloween. I tried to get her to like meme herself for the slide, but she didn't. Yeah, okay. So why should we use it? I mean, it doesn't really sound like a great option. It kind of sounds like words. But it gives residents a chance to learn from their mistakes before being thrown into the real world. They get to like see like how their actions affect others, and get to like really like live through that experience versus like, hey, the world's always gonna like kick me when I'm down. Teaches real world accountability. If you go to your job and you break a rule, like your boss is going to have a meeting with you at potentially, depending on who your boss is, will have a meeting with you and be like, hey, like, that's not okay. If you do it again, you're gonna get fired. So like learning from these mistakes teaches them like, hey, like when I make mistakes, there are consequences, and like I need to own up to those. It teaches student leaders valuable communication skills. I think this is probably like the most valuable for you guys. Is like you guys get to learn how to talk to difficult people. You get to learn how to have conversations about hard subjects, and you get to learn like how to like mediate conversations even if you don't agree with who you're talking to. That one has been like a hard lesson for me, and one that I'm still learning from through my experiences. Oh, I think I clicked the buttons like too much and then it like catches up. The world is moving towards a more restorative process in a lot of areas, which we will touch on in a few slides. Maybe after this slide, I don't really remember my presentation very well. But yeah, there's like a lot of like places that used to be like strictly punitive or like didn't even exist before like restorative justice was like really brought into like the mainstream. So like being able to like use these skills actually like might land you a job one day, because the world is moving forward and away from punitive. Okay. So restorative justice, yeah, it is the one right after. In the real world, before I'm so sick of a sip of water. Okay, this one is a personal story, so like buckle down, it's pretty fun. So last year, as a resident assistant in Mackenzie, we have 11 floors. It's like a tower. It's dorm style. Everyone shares bathrooms. There's a lot of roommates. It's crazy. I had 46 residents on my floor who I shared with a co-RA on my floor. Her name was Kayla Kim. Oh, her didn't come up. Okay, I just want to show you how cute she is. Okay, so we hated each other from the very beginning. It was like a power struggle. It was so bad that like kids on my floor would like tell us like, what is wrong? Like, why are you guys always fighting? And I was like, man, they would tell us we just needed to get a divorce. And it was like, we thought we were managing it pretty well. Obviously we were not. So like what ended up happening is like we struggled from about training, so like mid-August to like mid-October. It was like a very long, very passive-aggressive awfulness. I remember calling my stepmom and like crying about it probably like every second day, just like, I can't take this, like I'm gonna quit. And she's like, you're being ridiculous. Just talk to this girl. So what did I do? I went on to my E-class, which is what we use at the U of A, which resident services had an E-class up there that talked about restorative justice. And I went through like how to meet in the middle, kind of all the tips that they give you for like mediating a discussion, and applied them to myself. So like, where was I being difficult? Where did I need to step up? And I asked my co-RA if she would meet me for like and talk to me about what was going on, since it was like really affecting me. I had no idea if it was affecting her, but like it was really affecting me, and I thought like I was just being crazy. So we sat down. I printed off like, this is how to have a good mediated conversation. So instead of meeting with my RC, we put the paper between us as a mediator. And every time we felt that someone was like pushing a little too far, or that we felt like a mediator would be needed, we like touched the paper. It's like, like you're taking it too far. This is like in my tiny little dorm room on my bed, and like a Sunday morning in our pajamas, just like, no. And we had like a really good conversation. She told me like, hey, you're being really controlling. I feel like you're pushing me out. And I was like, hey, I feel like you're lazy and you're not like supporting us, you know? And she was like, oh, like, how do we fix this? So we did. We talked about like, hey, maybe like this month you do passive, this month I'll do active. Next month we'll switch because we have very different working styles. We talked about like agreeing, we made like a set plan, like at the beginning of the month, on the 5th of every month or whatever it was, we're going to agree on the programs that we're running. We're going to decide who's going to do what. We're going to list them out, and that way they can get it done at whatever pace they need to do. So that was our biggest struggle. Is she did it last minute. I was like, I don't got time for this. I'm doing it like today. So we did that, and honestly, it worked, and it kept working. October, our programs were like pretty dope. November, they were like good. December was like, I mean, finals, so they were kind of like bad, but like still like productive. And come January, we helped run a week in Mackenzie where it was like called Map to the Future, and it was like planning like a week-long events, kind of like a second like welcome to residents. And like that's where like we really bonded, and like honestly, she is one of my best friends today. She's amazing. I love her. I think she's like a great worker. But if you had asked me like a little over a year ago today, I'd probably be like, man, that girl, like, how did she become an RA? You know, it's just like being able to utilize those skills and being able to have a conversation, a mediated conversation, even between you and another coworker. Sorry, just checking the time, make sure I'm running okay. We packed a lot in. There's like a who coming end of video, and we got lots of time. Click news pretty quick. Yeah, so like that's like a personal story. I think that that's something that you could use all the time, even with your conversations with residents, even with your conversations with other RAs, with people you're working with. Okay, another one. This one is like, again, near and dear to my heart. A lot of rehabilitation centers in Canada. Rehabilitation centers for like drug and alcohol abuse, any kinds of like other addictions, talking about like people who maybe like have like a really rough past, or like, you know, have a history of like not having the best coping mechanisms. Rehabilitation centers, I think, like very strictly focus on restorative justice, in my understanding. It's their buildings made essentially to house these people who like haven't had really like that fair of a kick, who like need extra support to get where they want to be. So your steps start out, you do like, you know, working on yourself, working on your addictions, things like that. You move through those processes on like bettering yourself. What I've been told from a lot of people who've been addicts, the hardest part is then reaching out to the people that you love, being able to talk to them about what your struggles have been, being able to like mend bridges you might have broken. I know like personally, my stepsister recently in the last 2 months has now gone to a rehabilitation center. It's north of Edmonton. I forget where exactly it is. I know it's 30 minutes from my house. And it's called Poundmakers Lodge Treatment Center. It is like a First Nations like built and run rehabilitation center, which like I find very cool because like this is a process they've been using, a lot of groups have been using for like centuries. It's not anything new, but it's something that like might be new to like people who are used to like our current judicial system. So what they do is they bring these people in, they help them, and then after they're done battling their addictions, they help them reach out to their families. They help them talk to people that they may have hurt in the past, help them write letters, help them connect with people, give them a chance to really like clean the slate, and also to give those members like a chance to like how they've been hurt in the situation, which like if that isn't restorative justice, I don't know what is. And like helping these people like integrate back into society. And like, I mean, like I'm very passionate for it. I love it. I think it's like an amazing community. They use a lot of things like smudging, which is like the burning of like sage or sweetgrass to kind of like purify yourself. They use sweat lodges, round dances, they'll throw like powwows. It's like taking traditional motivators and like putting them into like the modern world and like helping people who may not have been exposed to that. You know, my stepsister is like a very like white lady, like I don't know how to say that, like she's descended from like some European family, like, but she was welcomed like with open arms in there, and she's learned a lot about it. Every time I see her, she tells me something new, and I think it's really cool that like they're able to share, you know, a part of their culture and help people who like may not have been exposed to this kind of justice before. That is a picture of a powwow there. Okay, and then this is our last video because holy crap, we're almost done, which is good because it's 11:36. Okay. If you could click that for me, please. It should open up to where it needs to be, and then I'll tell you when to stop. It's like a little bit longer. Thank you, Christian. I really appreciate you.
Yeah. Kind of like don't play.
We talked a little bit quietly just so you guys know when the video actually starts playing, so you'll have to like keep it down to hear it. You just pause it for 1 second. Okay, so what this is, this video, essentially, this guy's a neuroscientist. He's from the UK. He did a lot of work in prisons and with mice, seeing like if we could help people who like have been like, you know, pushed down by the judicial system, and how we can like help reintegrate them into society using science. And social science, actually, which is like not something you see a lot in like bioscience or neuroscience. It's usually like the neurons and the chemicals and things like that. This is like a lot about just like environment. So he's talking about like his work with people who've been declared psychopaths in like some pretty intense prisons. And his work with mice and regenerating, having neurogenesis in the amygdala of mice and potentially in the amygdala of criminals. For psychopaths, those are people who like typically, if you scan their brains, have like an amygdala that is like not as high functioning, which like is what really like limits like empathy and things like that. So I'm gonna let him talk for like, I think it's like, and then we'll like wrap up.
Down criminals with superpowers. But I am suggesting that we need to find ways to get Joe and people like him to change their brains and their behavior for their benefit and for the benefit of the rest of us. So, can brains change? For over 100 years, neuroanatomists and later neuroscientists held the view that after initial development in childhood, no new brain cells could grow in the adult human brain. The brain could only change within certain set limits. That was the dogma. But then in the 1990s, studies started showing, following the lead of Elizabeth Gould at Princeton and others, studies started showing the evidence of neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells in the adult mammalian brain. First in the olfactory bulb, responsible for our sense of smell, then in the hippocampus, involved in short-term memory, and finally in the amygdala itself. In order to understand how this process works, I left the psychopaths and joined the lab in Oxford, specializing in learning and development. And instead of psychopaths, I studied mice because the same pattern of brain responses appears across many different species of social animals. So if you rear a mouse in a standard cage, shoebox essentially with cotton wool, alone and without much stimulation, not only does it not thrive, but will often develop strange, repetitive behaviors. This naturally social animal will lose its ability to bond with other mice, even becoming aggressive when introduced to them. Mice reared in what we call an enriched environment, a larger habitation with other mice, with wheels and ladders and areas to explore, demonstrate neurogenesis, the birth of new brain cells. And as we showed, they also perform better on a range of learning and memory tasks. Now, they don't develop morality to the point of carrying the shopping bags of little old mice across the street. But their improved environment results in healthy, sociable behavior. Mice reared in a standard cage, by contrast, and not dissimilar, you might say, from a prison cell, have dramatically lower levels of new neurons in the brain. It is now clear that the amygdala of mammals, including primates like us, can show neurogenesis. In some areas of the brain, more than 20% of cells are newly formed. We're just beginning to understand what exact function these cells have, but what it implies is that the brain is capable of extraordinary change. However, our brains are also exquisitely sensitive to stress in our environment. Stress hormones, glucocorticoids, by the growth of these new cells. The more stress, the less brain development, which in turn causes less adaptability and causes higher stress levels. This is the interplay between nature and nurture in real time, in front of our eyes. When you think about it, it is ironic that our current solution for people with stressed amygdalas is to place them in an environment that actually inhibits any chance of further growth. Of course, imprisonment is a necessary part of the justice system and of protecting society. Our research does not suggest that criminals should submit their MRI scans as evidence in court and get off the hook because they've got a faulty amygdala. The evidence is actually the other way. Because our brains are capable of change, we need to take responsibility for our actions, and they need to take responsibility for their rehabilitation. One way such rehabilitation might work is through restorative justice programs. Here, victims, if they choose to participate, and perpetrators meet face-to-face in safe, structured encounters. And the perpetrator is encouraged to take responsibility for their actions, and the victim plays an active role in the process. In such a setting, the perpetrator can see, perhaps for the first time, as a real person with thoughts and feelings and a genuine emotional response. This stimulates the amygdala and may be a more effective rehabilitative practice than simple incarceration.
Good.
Such programs.
Thank you. Yes. So, like I said, I am majoring in psychology, so I find this very interesting. Small brains. I understand. Essentially, what he's saying is by giving people rehabilitative processes, basically fix their brains so they function like normal people, and give them a chance at a quality life instead of locking them behind bars forever and just hoping they don't hurt anybody else, right? Oh, so how can you use restorative justice? Okay. We'll go zoom through this. This is kind of fun. So as a student leader, you can do it yourself. You can have restorative conversations with your residents, with other RAs or community leaders. Really open your ears to offenders and hear them out. Like, get their side of things and actually like listen to them, not just be like, yeah, okay, like moving on. You can mediate discussions in complex situations, like we talked about. Oh, and in your personal relationships. Work out issues and within relationships. I use it a lot, so much so that like friends will be like, you can look for alternative solutions to issues. Keep questioning your current judicial system, what they can do better, how they can improve to actually help people, which like should be their goal. And becoming a neuroscientist, obviously, I relate to this gift a lot. Any questions or comments or concerns? It is 11:45. Does everyone have their phone?
Yeah.
Or like
I'm like ready to go.
Oh, people are ready for Kahoot. Has anyone not played Kahoot before? Kahoot? Yeah. Pull out your phone. So you'll just go to like kahoot.it, I believe, IT. And then you can put in like a code which will come up. And we will play a very quick Kahoot. Yes. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, you have to click it. But I also have it open on your yeah, and then you click play. And then 1 versus 1 player. Yeah, the one on the left. Yeah. And then yeah, perfect. It's connected. Cool. And then I'll just like pop down something with like next and stuff for it, so I can just come do that. It's only loaded 11%, so if anyone has a question. The music. Okay, if you enter that code into your phone, you can enter a name. Please be appropriate. You're student leaders. Check. It's just lunch hours. Lunch? Okay. If we go like 1 minute over, is that okay for people to play Kahoot? Oh, this is gonna be fun. Y'all better been listening, because like these are pretty detailed. Okay, everybody in and point. If you are not in, put your hands up, please. We'll wait for you. Okay. Okay, 1 more minute, guys. I don't want to run too far over and come into your lunch. Good. Everyone good? We're good? Okay, we go start. You guys ready? Pay attention. Oh.
Where is it?
I don't know what just happened.
Your network is slow, so you
Okay.
That'll do.
Oh, no.
Sorry, if you can enter the code very quickly again. I'm sorry. It like.
Oh, it's the same one.
nice.
You're good.
Same one.
Just start again. Just start.
Yeah, first start. Okay.
4, 3, 3, 2, 2.
I saw green, I was like, oh
You are a swag.
Hey guys, next question. Oh Okay, we're just gonna keep flying through these guys just so you know. We're just gonna keep looking next. Taylor, look at him. David, is that you?
No, I was someone impersonating.
Oh, shit.
I think you're close. That's your oh no. Okay, but I got it right.
We only have 5 more seconds to figure out something quick.
I read it wrong. I thought like you did. Taylor Swift. Who's Kanye?
It's him.
Like, oh, yeah, they're on things. I thought we switched it up. I see it. Whatever. I get it.
Oh, I must have screwed up on that one.
Oh, it's
Sorry.
okay.
It's so That is so
I was aware of the mistake.
I'm so sorry. Next question. We'll just move on.
So Dayna.
This is what it is.
That's all.
Smash that.
Okay.
Stand up.
Is that you?
Way behind those guys.
I have like a prize for the person.
Cool.
Who is ours, right?
Okay, I had a prize. So who was Ari Slagmaster? I left it in my cabin. Also, like embarrassing. Sorry for the wrong answer. What's funny is I actually played this Kahoot twice now and didn't notice it was like correct. So, yeah, thank you everyone for listening. I really appreciate it. If you have any other questions, comments, or concerns, let me know. I'll be here all weekend. So.
Give me a louder round of applause for Dayna. For presenting to us. I know firsthand when I was a student leader and stuff, presenting in front of colleagues is something that's really, really intimidating. So I think you did an absolutely amazing job, and I hope that everybody here who attended this presentation has something they can take away with it back to their institutions. If you're from the U of A, just keep living the lives that you guys are doing. You guys are doing awesome. Here's a little certificate for you here for your presentation, and I'm sure you put a lot of work into it. So here's some Tim Hortons coffee so you can recaffeinate. Don't forget, if you guys have the guidebook app, please open it up. There's a little feedback section there as well too, and if you could do that, that would be amazing. Give us some good feedback that you can take back home as well. Otherwise, you guys are all free as soon as you're done doing your feedback. Thank you guys.
Please don't break me on the Kahoot.